44 3rd Avenue, Heaton, Newcastle on Tyne, 20th of August 1917. Dear Sir, with reference to your advertisement in today's North Mail, I beg to apply for the post. I'm 14 years of age, strong, healthy, bright, punctual, clean and willing. My parents are working class. My environment is working class. The school I've just left is working class. And with your kind assistance, I feel qualified to become working class myself. It's usual to enclose testimonials as to one's good behaviour and ability when asking for a job. I send me horoscope instead. What's important about a man is not how able he is, nor how hard working, but what's his luck. Jack Common set great store by luck, although not much came his way. The title of his classic account of a northern working-class childhood was taken from the catchphrase of Jimmy Laymouth, one of the greatest music hall comics. "Hello, kidders, how's your luck?" He describes being taken on the shoulder of his father to music halls like this one, Bambra's, immortalised in the first verse of the Tyneside national anthem, Blaydon Races. This music hall tradition still survives on Tyneside.
Do you know what it is? I'm laughing myself. I've never heard it before. Well, he goes down to the club at night. He won the first 2 houses, 3 domino cards and a forecast pool. He says to his mate, "We're in the money, lad, we're in the money. Let's get sat drinking, just me and thee. Keep the committee away." 15... I must brush you there, pet. It's these teeth I'm trying to move for a horse. 15 bottles of brood each there they were, knocking them back. 10:30, shoot to the club, mortal drunk. Missed the last bus room. The shortest room was up the railway line. There they were, walking up the railway line, arm in arm, sleeper to sleeper. Geordie says, "Bah, this is a bloody long staircase, this lad." He said, "It's not the staircase that's worrying me, it's the bloody low banister."
I don't ever remember him talking about his writing. Jack's favourite topics, apart from some politics and some books, were football, Newcastle football, and music hall. And he used to go round the surviving, declining music halls of London in wartime. In the evenings, the Met, Collins, 1 or 2 more, and talk a great deal about the old stars that were still visible then and could still be seen. But of course, chiefly the comedians, the Billy Russells, the Billy Bennetts, the drolls of the music hall. He'd sort of savour them in conversation and laugh and talk about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here for votes, but I've lived in the council who's doing St. Anthony's Estate, Walker where the ducks walk backwards to keep the muck with their eyes. I have lived in St. Anthony's Estate, Walker, for 37 years. 37 years in a council house, never once the arrears of rent. The Newcastle Corporation had the cheek a fortnight ago to send me a letter complaining about the state of my back garden. 37 years in a council house and I didn't know I had a back garden.
Jack Common wasn't born in Walker. He was born next door in 3rd Avenue, Heaton. It's a sort of housing where the builder, assured of a market from that respectable strata of the working class who worked, like Jack's father, at the nearby engine sheds, never got round to giving the streets anything other than numbers. It's just far enough from the city centre to have escaped redevelopment and all that implies, and remains today much as it was when he was born. There were plenty of golden opportunities gone that neat, in palace and mansion flat, in hall and manor, and new centrally heated cottage, the wealthy, talented and beautiful lay coupled. Welcome rooms were 10 a penny, there must have been. What do you think I picked on, me and me jeans? I came upon the frost-rimmed roofs of a working-class suburb in Newcastle-on-Tyne, and in the back bedroom of an upstairs flat in a street parallel with a railway line on which a halted engine whistled to be let through the junction, I choose me future parents. There you are, it was done. By the time that engine took its right away and rolled into the blue glare of the junction arcs, another kidder was started. Jack's picture of his boyhood was so true to his experience that when the book was published in 1951, Turnstile Press was threatened with a collective libel action from the residents of 3rd Avenue.
Then everyone wanted his book not to be published because he had described his characters so well that everyone knew who he was meaning. Even me, though I was only about 18, I knew who he was meaning when he described the characters and the goings-ons in his own house. And he was always known as Kiddar, and if you saw him, he didn't say, "Aye, aye, Jack," he said, "Aye, aye, Kiddar."
Tommy McCulloch, who worked as an engine driver at Heaton sheds, was a lifelong friend, and later, when Jack left Tyneside, followed him to London.
And I started to read his stuff. Much of it was scarcely legible. And after about a year or two, I said, it's a typewriter you want, lad. So we managed to get him a second-hand Monarch 3-bank, on which he worked, and managed to write some articles, like. But in addition, he wrote to John Middleton Murry, who was then editing the Adelphi. His article apparently impressed John Middleton.
After a while, Murray pronounced. He put on the look which Lawrence has described as being like Mephistopheles, blind and begging in the street, and the oracle delivered. He said, "Common, you have the bones of a writer." I went home cock-a-hoop to announce that I got the bones of an author. I got the bones of an author, Murray says.
On the strength of Murray's diagnosis, Jack Common went to London, and after a number of casual jobs, eventually got work on Murray's influential literary magazine, the Adelphi.
First of all, he was the managing editor of the Adelphi magazine, and he did a lot of the interviewing, he did a lot of the traveling to interview new writers. He was responsible for discovering many of the writers, especially the proletarian writers from the north.
And I got a letter from him that Second Warburg, the publishers, were after proletarian writers, you see. Well, I didn't classify myself as a writer at all. And he commissioned me to do a job on the railway stuff, you see. And in his letter, it said, you know, he was seeking 6 other lads, all of whom would describe what they knew about work as best they could, and he would polish it ready for publication.
Editing 7 shifts, together with his collection of essays, Freedom of the Streets, brought Jack Common close to another 30s nonconformist.
I'd heard of this interesting man who had been a tramp, and who at the same time was capable of writing extremely good reviews for the magazine. And actually I wanted to meet him. And I was disappointed at once because it was quite obvious the man we were going to meet was a public school man. And he outlined his plans for Christmas. He intended to spend Christmas in jail. His idea was to light a sort of bonfire in Trafalgar Square and get run in. I counselled him against this. I always firmly held that if you're going to jail, you might as well have something for it. My advice was, take to theft. A bonfire would simply suggest something undergraduate-like. He'd probably be let off. But Orwell, or Blair as he was then, didn't take my advice. There's no jail. Don't know how he spent Christmas.
Jack's friendship with Orwell started quite a time before Orwell was famous. And I'm sure that Jack gave George Orwell as much, probably more, than Orwell gave to him. Since that time, Jack has existed really in books only because his letters to and from George Orwell and his relationships with George Orwell have given people material for books.
Well, of course, Orwell liked him so much that there was never any trouble over theories or anything like that. Orwell leaned on him rather like Dante leaned on Virgil.
On other things too, Middleton Murry and so on, Jack is a kind of name in an index of all these books, but not given any, his own letters are not published. All you have is his letters to these people.
One of the things that horrified him was climbing, the climbers in the political world, and the pseudo-Marxists, the pseudo-socialists, and all these pseudo-people. He claimed what they wanted, first of all, was a real dose of life, a real contact with the workers, not in a theoretical spirit, but right on the factory floor or the workshop floor. And in the pub. He got all his intellectuals in the pub. I think it was Jack Common was who first got Middleton Murry into a public house and introduced him to the bar, the four-railed bar.
He was always, with the exception of Orwell, much closer to the realities of life in the 30s than the literary figures around him. But by now, Middleton Murry had declared himself a Marxist and was organising summer camps at which wealthy Adelphi supporters rubbed shoulders uncomfortably with the articulate unemployed.
We had an extremely mixed gathering. There were people who'd followed Murray right through Keats and Shakespeare and Jesus and Blake and gone all the way. And there were, of course, the newcomers who only knew him as a literary gent who'd got wise to socialism. We had people like Seaman from Liverpool. He pointed out to wealthy Adelphi supporters that he came to eat, not to listen to lectures about Marx. He knew all about Marx, naturally, having been an employed seaman for years.
With the coming of the war, Jack Common was recruited as a scriptwriter for wartime propaganda films. One of the most successful was his Tyneside story.
What do you think, Maggie? Here's a letter from the Labour Exchange asking me to go back to the shipyard.
Aye, what a nerve. They didn't want you when you needed a job. I'd see them for the post.
Aye, but they've offered me foreman riveter, head foreman.
But you don't want a job. We've got this nice little business that you've strived and struggled for. You'd be daft if you went back.
Now listen, lass. I worked in the yard for 30 years, and I learned a trade where a man can show his skill. Anybody can do this job.
Well, no good, Fred. The Ministry of Labour's overruled us. You've got to go back to the shipyard.
The hell with the shipyard. They've no right to play fast and loose with men like this. Not so long ago, they threw us out of the yards to starve or scrounge. Skilled men, mind you. Brought up to a trade. And nobody cared. Now they want us back. There's a war on.
Now, wait a minute, Fred.
Next
You
thing
can't...
you know, the war'll be over and out again you'll go, you mugs. Ah, well, not for me. I've got a good job down here, and the missus has got a nice little home together. What? Go back to the shipyard? I'll see the men help us.
In the case of the two films that I best remember, Tyneside Story and Northeast Corner, which I actually produced, he would, of course, go back into the Northeast and refresh his feelings rather than his memory of the place and begin to get some things jotted down, and then with the director and producer it would start to shape up into something which was peculiar to that area and not something imposed from the London view.
His lifelong commitment to his class and region can be seen in the film's ending, where he suddenly cuts through the propaganda cliches of wartime uplift.
As long as Britain calls for ships, the call will be answered by the ring of steel on steel in the shipyards of the time.
Ah, but wait a minute. Tyneside's busy enough today. Old uns and young uns hard at work making good ships. But just remember what the yards looked like 5 years ago. Idle. Empty. Some of them derelict. And the skilled men that worked in them scattered and forgotten. Will it be the same again 5 years from now?
This was why we brought people like Jack in, and enormously valuable they were to us. The kind of feeling that one got Jack in a pub. He wasn't a person who made any great
show any great demonstration, but he sat there quietly, very much contained within himself, and one sensed an understanding. And when he began to talk about things, it was very different from the documentary filmmaker's approach, who tended to see perhaps too superficially in those days. And I think Jack enormously helped us to get deeper into people's true motivation, their reactions to the situation they happened to be in. It wasn't a question of writing dialogue. There was very little dialogue in our films, but selecting the instant, perhaps, in a human situation, which, if photographed, would, in a subtle kind of way, provide an insight into the character of the person shown. Jack, as a writer, quite frankly, I was astonished when I read his scripts, because although I had read Freedom of the Streets in the 30s, and although his conversation was very enjoyable, the purity of his English, the vigour of his English, and the quality of his thinking behind the English made a great impression on me. I was quite struck, even before Kiddar's Luck, with the work he did in the film scripts. And then when he brought out, to everybody's surprise, Kiddar's Luck, this convinced me that here was a truly English writer coming from a genuinely working class background, who reflected that background and yet gave it a quality of observation. His work had a quality of thought and observation which made you live with it.
I remember how well I thought of it at the start, and I still do. If you want to know why, I suppose the first thing to say is that he's got what's the basis of any good book like this, and that is an extraordinary eye for detail. I'm thinking of individual things, such as his observation of the particular place of Sunday afternoon in a working-class home, sending the kids to Sunday school so that the parents can have a quiet time and, in fact, go to bed and make love.
The heavy Sunday dinner, half a cow, greens, potatoes and Yorkshire, lashings of rice pudding to follow, which varied in detail but not in character through all the seasons, was the crown of the day. Rightly, too, for this heap of food marked the triumph of successful parenting, the winnings of the good provider, the achievement of the good cook. When it was over, then was a time for religion, both of them. In working class circles, Sunday afternoon is traditionally sacred to the worship of Venus and the nice lie down. Perhaps one reason why the working class in general is so good-humoured and patient, charitable and unenvious is that there must have been a great deal of them conceived on the day of grace.
But if there were just that, well, that would be useful, interesting anecdotage and not much more. I think more than that, what he brings out well are some of the main lines of working class life at that time. The second thing is the moment he gets where he's talking about playing out in the street on warmish days and playing on the pavement until dusk falls and you're called in. And what he manages to get there is a sense of quite extraordinary happiness. And that reminded me of the passage in Traherne about pure bliss in childhood, where he says the corn was orient and immortal wheat. He's talking about a child in the country. But this is a child on a pavement, and he's right, of course. And it isn't something that you can pin down to back lavatories and working class life. It's the being of a kid, beyond the detail of Newcastle.
I have one strong pavement memory, which must be pretty early. Summer again, and I was lying with my face close to the grey slate paving stones, tracing the cracks. They were as warm as dinner plates. And there was a powerful, sickly smell of privet in blossom. Then drops like pennies came splashing down, patterning the light summer pavement with dark discs, and faster, wetting my hands, my hair, my back. I chuckled over the lovely pennies. No doubt I was lugged to shelter soon enough, and by a little girl. Yet it was one of those moments, brief and trivial in themselves, for which time's clock stops.
The third thing is the one that made me laugh because I've met it too. The most neglected sense, officially, consciously, in all our writing, I think, is the sense of smell. We don't often mention it. But in fact, when you're a child, or when you're writing about your own early childhood, you tend to find that you work your way through to things by your nose. You're moving with your nose down all the time like a dog, going from lamppost to lamppost. And he does exactly that. You check through it and you'll find that what comes up sharp after page is the smell of cooking, the smell of his mother's dress. He even talks about the smell of women's clothes at that time, which are very long, and you could smell urine on them because of complicated reasons.
She pulled her chair well into the fire, pulled up her skirts to give her knees a warm, thus showing black stockings gartered below the knee with bits of old ribbon or bootlace and black boot laced up to support the broken ankle. When her skirts warmed, they smelt of piss. This was not at all unusual among Edwardian females, by the way. I suppose ladies' lavatories were scarcer, or perhaps the long skirt of the period encouraged the easy yielding to the promptings of the bladder. Anyway, it was a frequent encounter, if you were a small boy, to come into a quiet back lane and find a lady apparently lost in thought. Her eyes surveyed the rooftops or looked without purpose into the distance. Was she listening to that muffled splashing? She certainly took no notice of the dark stream appearing under her boot. And when you came closer to see what it was, "Go away, boy," she'd say.
He makes a friend of a boy who's rather posher. Seems incredibly posh to him because they have a firework display, but father sets them off. He's an only child, I remember, and they have a proper tea and so on. That rings so true. What he's doing is making his first real recognition of the very complicated class gradations in English life.
There were no gorgeous rockets or fat Roman candles around these parts. We went in for the cheaper kinds you got more of. And many a group now were down to squibs. It didn't so much matter, so long as you had something to make you one of the crowd. There was a crowd, too. Not much hope of getting the offsprings early to bed tonight. You could see even the neat toddlers solemnly lighting each other's sparklers from the hot end of the last one to burn out. And there were little girls running wild as they tried to throw lit London lights into the air. Naturally, the excitement I missed at Edmund's do got me now.
This is a rare gift, I think. A lot of people go around putting on a show about working class life, and a lot of bad things happen and all the rest of it. And in fact, to my mind, they cheapen and vulgarize working class life.
It was, I think, about 1953 or 4 that I first read this book, by which time I was well advanced with my own. And I remember, incidentally, being struck by the similarity and approach, and even in angle of vision and so on. When my book came out, it did have a lot of success. And I think my first answer to your question would be that there's such a thing as the climate of the time, and that by the late 50s, for very complicated reasons, people were more ready to listen to this kind of inquiry.
When he writes about working class life, he writes, first of all, I would say, as an educated man in the real sense of the word, that he's able to use the English language in a flexible, honest, and imaginative way, and at the same time he's able to report faithfully on life as he's in his own childhood, in this case, of course. And it is a great tragedy that he did nothing else.
The concluding years of his life was rather full of struggle. He was busy doing scripts for the ABC people, examining as much as 5 books a week. Though the money was a little better for him, it was hack writing in his eyes, you know. Comparable to a craftsman washing dishes, so to speak. Struggle, struggle, struggle. Ideas about book production and book writing, you see, had to be shelved. Just didn't have the time.
To get a living, you had to do, if you could get them, at least 10 books a week, if not more. Most of them, of course, were very bad books, very poor, rubbishy books. Your mind at the end of a week of this was like blotting paper, soaking up kind of foul water. And you were incapable of putting down sensibly thoughts of your own. In fact, if people asked you a question like, "It's a nice day, isn't it?" you'd find yourself unable to grope for an answer.
Kiddar's Luck was followed by the AMPERSAND, but the third part of the trilogy was never completed. Yet, as the graffiti writers would put it, and in Highgate Cemetery of all places, Jack Common lives.
I decided to base Karl Marx's eyebrows on the fundamental structure of Jack Common's brow. For here I found many of the human qualities that I could see in the photographs, and I understood from reading the life of Karl Marx. Human sympathy, tolerance, and a profound understanding, and an inexhaustible patience. For Jack had tremendous patience, both with his friends and with his own life.
Oh, but he had bad luck. It persisted throughout his life. Otherwise, how would he die a poor man with these qualities? Most people who do recognize it have any idea of literature. Have read anything at all. What do you say can be such an answer? At least one book, one thing should have made the grade if he had any luck at all. He didn't. Bad luck persisted throughout, right till his death.
The archangels of chance gave to me an unprofitable heredity and a stony environment. So far, I cannot claim to have experienced any exceptionally toward event which might suggest that I'm a destined child of fortune. Nevertheless, as it's high time the look of the Kiddars toned, that goes for all of them. I intend to live in every possible way as if it had. No doubt you prefer something better. Believe me, what I offer so frankly is what you're increasingly likely to get from any one of that host who might sign themselves, as I do, yours truly, W. Kiddar.
If you have a friend on whom you think you can rely, you are a lucky man. If you found the reason to live on and not to die, you are a lucky man.